Hello and welcome. My name is Adam Barnard, and on behalf of GateWorld.net, I'm here with actor Philip Alexander, who plays Captain Beal in Stargate Origins. Philip, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So, this might be a surprise to some people, it's a surprise to me. You are actually not British.
No.
Right? It's so convincing. I was expecting to be calling across the pond, maybe someone who even lived in London or was like a proper theater actor, and you're American, correct?
Yes, I am. I'm American. I was raised kind of overseas. My dad was a diplomat, so I moved around a lot as a kid in the Middle East and in Europe. But I actually trained in London at a school called Lambda, the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, which is where guys like Benedict Cumberbatch, David Oyelowo, Ruth Wilson all went. So it was so maybe I cheated.
So you got some of the influence maybe with the training.
Yeah, and I made it a real point during my training. We had a fantastic department at Lambda, and a lot of our training was in dialect coaching because, especially in England, there are so many different dialects.
Right.
Regionally, that it's very important to have a well-rounded career, to be able to do things like Glaswegian or, obviously RP, sort of standard English, standard British English, London, Belfast, West Irish, all those kinds of accents. So that was, ingrained into the students. And then I made it a point while there to be able to do one as well as possible. So I would do it for weeks at a time and just have because I was, one of the few Americans there. And so I'd have my British friends critique me and they'd say no, that's not it. You're not getting it today. And I'd go, thank you. Appreciate it. That's why I'm annoying you by doing this.
It's interesting you mentioned that about dialects because I grew up in the South and everyone who tried to do a British accent there failed dramatically because they had this very static one note impression of oh, hello, how you doing?
Right.
They didn't really understand the variety and they always moved their voice up an octave. That was just a natural thing to do, and that's not how you're supposed to do it. So it's interesting that you bring up how many different variations there are regionally.
Yeah, there's a huge variation, and it's something that is very much being acknowledged and supported in England as well. The kind of a move towards more regional stories, because what happens when you have a standard, you have the standard British English RP that was sort of invented. They call it BBC English, right? It was made sort of standardized, and it kind of comes from nowhere. So in that sense, some sort of regional voices are lost and become sort of marginalized, and that's why there's a really cool movement of saying, we want stories from all over the country, because the lives of the people who speak different dialects, that's very much a part of their culture. There's certain reasons and genealogies to how these accents formed. So it's really cool, and it's a great experience to be able to learn about that.
So you said when you were growing up, you actually traveled and ostensibly lived over internationally for certain periods of time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did that at all influence or at all tie into your character? Because I know the character of Beal is stationed at an African outpost. So did you find some kind of kindred connection to that?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for being a bit uncomfortable in a situation where you're given, because obviously as a diplomat, privileges and benefits are given to you that maybe local people don't even have, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe there was a discomfort there always of being, I'm from another country and I'm sort of a tourist here unless I really choose to get involved in the culture. And I'll never really be from that place, but it did encourage me to always, as a young person and then later in life, to try to find commonalities.
Yeah, absolutely.
With anyone that I met. And I think Beal is acutely aware of that. Well, sometimes he is. It would be great to sort of see how him and Wasif met and their sort of relationship up until then. But I think it was pretty well established. Beal thinks he knows it all.
Certainly.
And Wasif has to remind him, you don't. You don't even know things about me. That's kind of so. There's a presumptuousness to it,
Yeah.
which is a helpful thing to have.
So what was it like portraying a character from a specific period in time, like a World War II era character? And specifically, what region did he have any backstory, or how did you approach him from like an accent and culture perspective?
I think Beal is from a well-to-do family,
Yeah.
maybe not too well-to-do. My backstory for him was drawn on history. I mean, I studied history and anthropology in university, and so I sort of drew on those research methods to look into what it was like, because it was a very different pre-war British Army was not ready. Right, it was a different system than certainly when it ramped up, like in the late 30s and early 40s.
Right.
So the people that were sort of career military guys were often commissioned, and there wasn't a wartime emphasis. So it was very much like a society thing to do.
Right. Right.
Join the military, and it's of some esteem, and you just sort of lead that career as part of the officer class. And I don't know enough about British society. I've experienced some of it, but I would say that he was sort of upper middle class, and that was just something that you did. You went to boarding school, and then you became a commissioned officer, and you were sent wherever they sent you.
So with him being like he has a bit of like a swashbuckling, very educated side, but also I think as Origins unwinds and expands, you start to see more of the militaristic grit come out. Did you base any of that characterization on like any kind of classic English film or literature? Like, I only say that because I grew up on like the Hardy Boys or the Famous Five or the Battle of Britain, Bridge of the River Kwai, A Bridge Too Far, like all these war movies. And like I said earlier, when I saw your character, it just felt right. Like I thought you did a pitch perfect depiction of someone who was plucked right out of that very classic era. So was there anything in specific that the show producers or Mercedes or you pulled upon for the character of Beal?
I think plucked is a good word, because I think he's very plucky. I think that's his a big part of his character. And I think, to be honest, a lot of it was just how well he was written.
Really? Oh, cool.
It was that clear. It jumps out at you, and you don't even have to do that much work. That's the best part of being an actor, when you're given a really good script and a character that stands out. So when I read him, I just knew. And obviously there's training and whatnot that goes into figuring out certain things. But I just had an instinctual connection with him. And I think in terms of any influences, I actually looked at a lot of, from what I could get my hands on, World War II footage of guys in Egypt, like around El Alamein particularly, in the desert campaigns against Rommel. And it's funny because the footage is, it's not, maybe it's sped up. There's a certain energy to it that makes it seem like it's maybe more optimistic than it is. But I just wanted to see how, and I look at like, what do these guys look like and how do they behave? And I think there is an optimism and a naivete for Beal, but I think there's an optimism when you see these guys and you hear about the horrible things that they went through in combat, but then you see these pictures and they're all just, these little handheld videos, and they're waving at each other and joking around and, on their tanks, right?
Yeah.
Ready to go into battle. So I think that I pulled a lot from there. And certainly those movies, The Bridge on the River Kwai, The Longest Day.
Yeah.
I saw those as a kid. I loved war movies.
Same here.
And I felt because there's also a decision you have to make as an actor as to the genre that you're working in. Right. So there has to be a stylistic and a sort of world. I see it in terms of colors and like sound. You have to get the mood and the pitch. You have to pitch it right.
Right.
So this isn't Saving Private Ryan, which even though it's an amazing film during the same place, it's not the same thing. This is a very much a different story. And so I also pulled on one of my favorite movies ever is the 1999 Mummy.
Oh.
Which balance, when I read that, I thought, man, this is, what a gift. Because that movie, like Brendan Fraser's performance in that really has this mix of levity and danger.
Sure, yeah.
So I guess I pull on things that I love, you know.
You always got to put a part of yourself in the characters, I guess, to find that negative truth. I liked what you said about the optimism, because I think that's something that, England was known for in the war, because they just got their butts kicked and pummeled domestically and in Africa and Dunkirk and Battle of Britain, the bombing of London. And somehow through it all, they kept the best spirit. And I think they had good leadership, maybe as part of their culture. But like, that's something I think they're known for. And that's one of the reasons I liked seeing that energy in Beal. Like, even if he's a little fish out of water, going to Abydos or going with the group, like,
Sure.
he's the one who has to, maintain that sense of authority and militaristic discipline and courage. So it's always nice to see, human characters who also find like a lot of strengths in these kinds of adventures.
Yeah, and he has to keep his head on. That's the crux of his character, and that was the crux of, I think, British philosophy. Keep calm, carry on. That's just, you just keep it together, because you're getting blitzed and your cities are being bombed, and you keep going about your business. And then when the sirens go off, you just go underground.
Right. It's so proper, and so it's not, they limit the emotion to what's necessary. They don't freak out. They don't have, they're able to keep some kind of discipline or calm core, which I always respected.
Yeah.
So let's get into the auditioning for the process and getting involved with Stargate Origins. Did you, was Ellie already on board as Catherine Langford, and did you do chemistry reads with her, or did you guys audition separately? Can you just walk us through what that process was like that led up to you getting cast?
Sure. I think this was maybe September that I got a request for a self-tape for a codenamed project. He sort of gave this breakdown in this British officer, and I actually didn't even have sides from the film. I was given some sides from another film to do this character, to sort of do what I would do with the character given his description, and then because they didn't want to release any information, obviously. So I sent in the self-tape, and I thought nothing of it, because you never can. Right. You have to just do it and forget about it. And I had moved to LA permanently, from London right after training in like May. And then I got this, and I said, I'm going to leave for 3 days. I'm going to leave. I can do it. I can afford it. I can afford to leave for 3 days. And I'm at this wedding, and like the wedding celebrations are happening, and my manager calls and says, you got to come back. You have a recall for the show. And I was like, okay. So I got another flight and left early, came back to LA. Yeah. And then they gave me actual sides
from the actual origin script.
From the actual origin script. And I knew immediately that it was Stargate. I had this funny interchange with Mercedes, because we were, doing this bit. My audition scene was the bit when we go through the gate, and Kat's like, look at it, and Beal's like, I am looking at it.
Right.
I see it, and I asked Mercedes a question. I think I said, so when we're about to go through the sort of Stargate portal thing, and she goes, she's like, wait, we had this sort of moment where we both looked at each other, and I was like, oh, it is Stargate, isn't it?
You were testing her, right? You were seeing if she would notice.
I was testing her. The next day I had a chemistry read with some other actors. Ellie was not there, and then I found out like a week later that I got Beal, and only on the day of rehearsals did I meet Ellie.
Okay, interesting.
First, we had a day of rehearsals like a few days before shooting, and she walked in to the rehearsal space, and I said something stupid like, "Oh, are you in the production team?" And she's like, "No, I'm playing Catherine Langford." And I thought, "Of course you are." Idiot.
Yeah, everyone has that experience on set where they ask the star, like, "Oh, are you like the stunt team or something?" I've done that too. It's terrible. I know the feeling.
But we had no idea, right? I had no idea of anyone else who was involved and who got it, which was neat. That was the cool part of it. But that was, strangely enough, that was the coolest audition sort of experience that I'd had.
Did it sounds like you're actually kind of familiar with Stargate before this audition. Had you seen like SG-1 or the TV shows or the movie? Did you watch it growing up? Did you have any like personal experiences with the shows before then?
I was a huge fan of the film.
Okay.
The 1994 film.
Right, yeah, the thing that started it all.
Started it all, man. And I saw it when I was really young, and my friend had it on VHS or something.
VHS, yeah, the things that we now put in museums. It's so long ago, right?
Smithsonian. But I watched it there, and I loved it, man, because I loved history from being a very young kid. I adored ancient history, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, ancient, just classical history. And when they had this thing, combining aliens with ancient Egypt, with soldiers and portals, and I mean, I geeked out completely. And that always stuck. And I think, to be honest, the reason I missed the show was I was living overseas.
Oh, wow.
For a lot of that, and I was moving around a lot anyway, and so I never kind of got access to it. I knew it was happening, and I think I saw a few episodes of SG-1 and maybe of Atlantis.
Right.
But for me, the thing that always stuck in my mind was just watching the film as a kid, and that was around that time when there's a lot of those the late 90s.
Sure. Yeah.
Movies with this, like the Independence Day. I think that was kind of when.
Yeah, Independence Day was, I think, 96, and Stargate was 94. So Roland Emmerich did those two pretty close together, and they were both just titanic hits.
Yeah, I think I saw them all kind of maybe it was like the early 2000s. I kind of found them all, right? And then I sort of watched them all.
And it was definitely much harder to find content back then because we didn't have Netflix or iTunes or on-demand streaming. Like, it was very much like it was either airing. If you were overseas, you had to find it on a cable channel, or you had to search out the VHS or at some point the DVDs. But it's back then it was very, very easy to miss something that came out because of the lack of extensive distribution that we have today.
Right. So it's certainly on my list now.
Right. Now that you've been in Stargate.
Yeah, now that I've been in it, I should probably watch the series. But I think I do have such fond memories of that because I didn't understand. It blew my mind, right, this film, because it was nothing unlike anything I'd really seen before because of the genre combinations. I mean, I thought it was really weird. There's some weird stuff, like with Raw speaking in this voice, and this really, like, I think I said it in my interview with Kieran, this really, like, it was operatic. It was like Wagner.
Right.
The scale of it, and it was just audacious and bold. And like, we are going to do this. We're going to have, a cosmic ancient Egyptian demigod come down. I mean, it was great.
Yeah, I loved it. I think the GateWorld are always into operatics and into this opulent display of power and control. I mean, that's just part of what gets explored in the movie as well as in the TV show with the System Lords. And that's what connected with me as well. I just thought it felt right, It felt so connected to our heritage as a planet and even the here and now with, like, the modern day militaries. So, yeah, I was the same way. Like, what you described was exactly the same for me with Atlantis and with SG-1 when it was the early 2000s as well. So once you got cast in Origins, you got to read the whole script. You must have been really excited, being a fan of the original movie, at how much Origins specifically relates to the original movie and has a lot of callbacks and connections. What was that like to read the whole script in its entirety?
I read it the moment I got it, the whole thing, twice through, just back to back. I can't even remember if we knew how much it connected to the film, but I knew that it was talking about Catherine Langford,
right,
and that amazing prologue from the initial film.
Certainly, right. I mean, that leads in straight to Origins. Like they tack that on. It kind of gives you a bit of context about what young Catherine Langford did at the dig in Giza.
Right, and obviously, as a fan, I was freaking out. I was absolutely losing my mind. I remember calling my parents and just saying, you're never gonna believe this. It was really neat to be able to read that script from beginning to end, having the knowledge that I did of the film and knowing where it fit in. And I really just immersed myself in that time period from, like, that moment. I had a lot of other, obviously, commitments that I had to deal with it, but I said, you know what? I'm actually just going to really enjoy this.
That's good.
This new story, that takes place in a universe that I love very much, and I downloaded it because I remember that the score was amazing. So I went and found it on YouTube because I couldn't even find it to buy it anywhere, and so I just listened to that, and it had this incredible magic. It was beautiful. It captured all these things. This sort of space opera with the sort of common musical themes that we have from Egypt, films about Egypt, sort of Lawrence of Arabia, those very noticeable scales, right?
Right, yeah. There's certain tonalities or chord progressions or like leads. It kind of, I think like a good theme can define a franchise. Like, like Star Trek or Star Wars or some other, or even Jurassic. Like John Williams is the master of doing those themes. But some other franchises like Stargate get a little overlooked for their music, and it sets the tone. And I mean, it gives the film or the TV show that kind of feeling. Like Joel Goldsmith, who's the son of Jerry Goldsmith, another legendary composer, did all the TV shows, and he did a great job with the themes and a lot of the recurring music. Like you said, I love your approach because like Stargate is more than just like the mythology or the images. It's about like the adventure, the friendships. It's about the visuals. It's about a lot of things, and so it's cool that you kind of had a holistic approach to it.
It was very holistic, and it was born out of a gratitude, one, for MGM being making the choice to do this,
Right.
and knowing how much you don't realize how much something affects you, I think, until maybe you sometimes later in life, after 10 years, you think, my goodness, I've been so inspired by this thing, and you might forget the source of it.
Sure, yeah.
Until you revisit it again, and you think that no one, because I loved science fiction as well, Dune, and Star Wars, obviously.
Yeah.
And so when you see how brilliantly they combined all those things into something that they pulled it off. The chance to immerse myself in that so early in my career, I'm a bit spoiled now. so I there wasn't a moment that went by that I wasn't very aware of the privilege and the gift it was to act it out. Something that I would play around it as in my house, as a kid. Running around with my blaster or whatever, fighting whoever the alien of the day was.
It's a way for grown-ups to kind of capture their inner child and make pretend again like I used to as a adolescent, which is what I've had. And that's what's so cool. I think that's what everyone wants to go into filmmaking because, they have this dream, like all the things you watched when you're young, you want it to be real. You actually want to visit other planets, and like to act in Stargate or act in Star Wars, like that is as close as you can get as an adult to actually going on these wild adventures. In terms of the actual origin set, I wanted to ask, what was it like to work with Mercedes, and what was her directing style like, especially when it came to you and Catherine and you and Wasif? I've heard a lot of interesting things and good things about her as like a character director and the choices she made. So can you just talk a bit about that dynamic you cultivated of the characters?
Sure. Mercedes was so supportive of our work as actors. She said from the very beginning that she really wanted to help us and facilitate in any way possible us delivering the best performances that we could, from answering any questions from big level stuff to the most mundane kind of things. Really helped us focus on the very beginning on the relationship between Catherine Beal and Wasif, and then that being a sort of core element, and then how that grew as they went on their adventure together. But I think that forming that was a real joy to build on what was already there in the script, and she was always very open to interpretation, improvisation. It was just I felt I can't tell you how safe and supported I felt on that set.
That's really good, because I think it can get very stressful to work on bigger projects and realize what's ahead of you. But like, I think all the people, the directors who I followed, they say like, you just got to focus on what makes this scene work in the moment. It's not about all the lights or the operatics of it. It's about like the characters and the performance and having an honest connection, I think.
Of course. And she fostered that. That was an attitude that was just top down. And it also helped that everyone else involved was incredible as well. At the end of the day, it's about serving the story. And the story, the beautiful thing about making films is that every film that's made is a miracle. It shouldn't happen. And most films do fall apart. And so before they even get made. So everyone had an incredible investment and commitment and love for the project. And so what you're seeing on film is not only the result of things that were planned, but many things that were unplanned and improvisation. And that, in a sense, is a great sort of meta narrative or metaphor. I was going to say metaphor, but like that's the same thing, Philip. But that's what happens on these space adventures, right? If everything went to plan, what's the point?
Did you guys have any instances like that where it's like some kind of problem came up that, or you had a moment that just took a sharp left turn from the script for the better?
I remember the scene that always sticks out to me was there's the scene where we shot in the desert where the group is kind of breaking off. So Catherine is going off with Kasuf, and I'm going off with Wasif back to the village, right, and it's sort of sunsetting. And because of the scheduling and the environment and just the shooting schedule, we got to that point and we had time for one take for that. We had minutes, to nail this elaborate. I mean, it was a complicated scene. There was a lot going on, but for this last take that we had, I mean, we did it because the sun was setting, and we got it, and it was beautiful. You're like, we did it. Okay, let's move on. But there were so many times that I can't even remember of people. I mean, I think Bonnie Way when when Dan Rashid did he's like, oh, Bonnie Way. That's totally him. That's absolutely the brilliance of Dan Rashid and his sort of comedic timing. And just that it's sprinkled with, the whole film is just sprinkled with moments of that, and not just with the actors, but like our director of photography, Nico Aguilar, he would just do things. The man was an absolute wizard.
He's young too, isn't he? Like 23 or something.
Yeah, he's incredible. He's something. He's one to look out for. He would just move his hand through a shadow or through a beam of light, and kind of test it out, and he'd go, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then this thing would, occur on screen, and he'd capture it. And that was, and then you had Mercedes would, the amount of pressure on her was immense. And she would just do it. She'd just make it happen. And she'd make really excellent creative leadership choices.
Yeah, directing requires creativity as well as being an excellent manager. So it's, some directors, they only have one and not the other, but it's so great to find one that has that ability to stay calm. Like, I respect it. I don't know how I would be able to stay calm if I was making something like making the next Stargate, having all those things to deal with,
It's a lot.
Okay, so I want to just quickly and specifically talk a bit about Beal and Catherine, because they're very different characters from different backgrounds. Catherine's upbringing is obviously very different than Beal's from what we talked about earlier. And they do have this interesting feisty dynamic, but there's also quite a bit of romance in it. How did you approach that?
I think what's neat about Catherine and Beal's relationship is that this adventure takes place so soon after they meet. And it's a kind of pressure that would put even the most, long-term tried and tested couples to the test.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that they're discovering things about themselves and about each other under very high stakes. You're faced with an intergalactic portal, right? And whether or not to go through and all the kind of things. So these things are being, they're being faced with themselves and these choices that they never thought they'd have to make. But I think also Ellie and I have a great friendship and a really good rapport. So it was easy to be able to play because, like you said, both Beal and Catherine are very intelligent and very strong-willed and seek adventure, perhaps with different strategies. But the writing obviously supported that as well. And there was just that it's fun. They're having fun too. Right there, it was never it was never spiteful or mean spirited, but it was just a sense of these are sort of young kids who are really doing their best,
Yeah, they definitely took turns to play with each other. That's one thing I noticed. Like the first episode, she's very much like where we start in the warehouse, she's very much, playing with you a little bit, even when her father's around. And then, as we get to Abydos, the tables might turn. It's fun, it has that kind of spark, which I really liked. In terms of the end, Beals Fate, spoiler alert, obviously. Do you think do you think he changes at all? Because he very much sacrifices his life for her, and is that just out of a sense of duty, like British officer's duty, or is that something where you think he kind of developed a love for her and it was more about the romanticism of it?
I think it's love.
Okay,
I think
cool.
I think when people are faced with those kinds of decisions, someone that they love is in danger, it's just automatic.
Right.
And he had the training obviously to do these things, and his mind got in the way a lot of times of being as valiant maybe as he wanted to be or thought he had the ability to be. But towards the end, when they have to get home and the adventure is sort of reaching its climax, he's not he's acting out of a place of instinct.
It's like a human evolutionary instinct to protect what you love and protect those around you, right?
It's the greatest adventure of his life,
Certainly.
and it demands. And that's the thing, is these experiences change you, and some people have the opportunity to learn from them and to continue living their life and say, wow, that was great. And then for some other people like Beal, it was just his time. Yeah, it wasn't a sense where he's like, oh, well, this is me making this choice to save her life and sacrifice. He's just said, we got to get you through.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
something happened to her, her and dad. He didn't know
Oh,
something
and
was
she
weird.
was or she was essentially had her memory wiped by a set, right? And she's kind of in this
Right.
trance where you find her the very last episode.
Yeah. And so he finds her, and he's sort of accomplished all the things, and then he gets her through, and he fully expects that he's going to make it too, but he doesn't.
So I interviewed Mark Ilvitson, the writer, recently, and he actually said, I'm not even sure if you're aware of this, he said there was originally an alternate fate for Beal, where Beal made it through the gate and had like a Humphrey Bogart type ending where he didn't have his memory wiped, so he had to keep shut about that experience and stay away from Catherine. So Catherine doesn't remember him, and he, like as we kind of talked about, he falls for Catherine, but he has to walk the other way for the greater good because he
Hmm.
can't bring that through. Was that alternate ending discussed? Did you play a part in how the final fate of the character was crafted at all?
Uh, that was the original ending in the script that I got
Oh,
when it was
okay.
cast. That doesn't mean that there weren't other versions floating around, sort of in the writers' room. Um, but it was this thing where Beale understood that he was essentially erased from this journey, and he just left. He just and that was heartbreaking in a different way. I think when I was told later through the shooting process that he was going to die, it felt better to me, because that's hard too. It'd be harder for as a character to. Yeah, I think just from a story standpoint, I think, and also a character standpoint, it was the best. It was the best way.
Yeah, it's bittersweet for sure. I think a lot of people have bittersweet endings, like Kasuf or Wasif. They might even survive, but it's not exactly a happy ending where everything is resolved. But it does add to a sense of danger. Like I think it tugs at your heartstrings, but in a way that you said it's right. It's not everyone can survive these kinds of things. Otherwise, it's not realistic anymore.
Right. No one can, and I think and the editing that was done, and the way that the last thing he saw was Catherine kind of fading into nothing. That was whew, that hit me.
Yeah.
That was it's tragic, but if he could choose, that's how he'd go anyway.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Philip. I really appreciate you sitting down and examining this character of Beal. He was one of my favorites. I thought his adventurous spirit really helped define the kind of the tone of Stargate Origins and that real chemistry between the three leads. What's next for you going forward? Do you have any projects or anything you can tease for us? Maybe any adventures besides acting you're interested in that you can share with us?
Sure. I've been working on several projects and several films, a few of which are being submitted to festivals at the moment, so I can't unfortunately disclose what they are, but I'll be posting about them on social media when I can. And the great thing about working on a project like Stargate is that I just got to meet so many wonderful creatives, and I've maintained friendships with many of them. And so as an actor, it's an incredibly rewarding experience, but it's also just it enriches my life to be able to leave with friends and inspiring people. So I've just I've been inspired to continue and grow, and I'm just really grateful to have been a part of it.
Well, it's good to have you as part of the family. I know it could be a little intimidating sometimes. I mean, Stargate fans can be a little possessive, but it's because they care. And at the end of the day, like everyone does get ushered into the family, and however dysfunctional, it is a really great environment, and that's something you have with you for your whole life. That's part of like your career legacy, because Stargate is such a big and almost religious experience for a lot of fans. So thank you so much for sharing time with us, and we absolutely wish you the best of luck in your future career.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.